Most of us know this situation. Some song comes up and we immediately start nodding along and have a smile on our face. This experience is commonly known as feeling the groove. The concept of groove was coined in relation to popular music in North America. However, the underlying experience, this visceral and nearly automatic bodily reaction to music, is not restricted to any musical style. People experience groove whenever they feel inspired to dance in response to music, regardless of repertoire or cultural background. The groove experience is universal in this respect. Music psychology started to investigate the groove phenomenon relatively late. The pioneer in this domain was Guy Madison. He raised the topic at conferences in the early 2000s and published a first study in 2006. The most cited psychological definition of groove was provided by Petr Janata and colleagues in 2012. They defined the groove experience as a pleasant sense of wanting to move along with the music. After 2012, more researchers boarded the train, and by 2020, approximately 50 empirical groove studies had been published. What is it in the music, in us, or in the listening situation that makes us want to dance? This is the fundamental question of groove research. In order to answer this question empirically, we need a way to measure the strength of the groove experience. Past studies have used a variety of psychometric instruments to measure groove. They range from brief, one-item scales to more elaborate tools. Back in 2019, we decided that it was time for a standardized instrument to measure groove in listening experiments. We wanted it to be developed according to psychometric principles. We wanted it to be short, reliable, valid, and applicable in many research situations. We came up with the Experience of Groove Questionnaire, or EGQ, that we present to you today. Now, who is we? The EGQ was developed by a group of researchers from 3 different countries. The core team is based in Lucerne, Switzerland. One colleague is from the University of Oslo in Norway. And another colleague is from the Hanover University of Music, Drama and Media in Hanover, Germany. Our goal was a questionnaire with 2 scales. The first scale measures how intensely music listeners feel the urge to move. The second scale measures how much pleasure they experience while listening. This is according to Janata's definition of groove as a pleasant sense of wanting to move along with the music. We followed the methodology by Betsy McCoach and colleagues, presented in their 2013 book, Instrument Development in the Affective Domain. The procedure had 2 phases. The first phase was dedicated to collecting items and letting experts in the field judge these items. The second phase was dedicated to reducing the number of items for each scale and to assessing the reliability of the scales. We assembled 25 candidate questionnaire items. They are listed in this table. Many of them were derived from the questionnaires that we found in the literature, but we also added some of our own. Next, we asked 15 of our groove research colleagues to judge how well each item captured either of the 2 constructs. Thus, they helped us establish the content validity of the items. The experts associated 9 items with the urge to move concept. These items form the upper block. The item with the highest mean rating is listed on top. It says, "This music evokes the sensation of wanting to move some part of the body." The item was derived from Madison's studies. The experts associated items number 10 to 20 with the pleasure concept, here in the central block. The highest rated item mentions the pleasure concept verbatim. Listening to this music gives me pleasure. We adapted this from a study by Maria Wittek. The colleagues also gave us arguments to drop items. For example, items 21 and 22 were criticized for using the words dance party and gym. These concepts are relevant in the West, but not necessarily anywhere else in the world. So we discarded these items. In the second phase, we carried out 2 listening experiments with 8 stimuli. We wanted the participants to experience a wide range of responses in the urge to move and pleasure dimensions. So we chose stimuli that would trigger strong reactions in either directions. For example, we thought that Superstition by Stevie Wonder would trigger a strong urge to move and strong pleasure. We also selected stimuli that we assumed would trigger responses from the other end of the spectrum. Number 7 is the track Machine Gun by the Peter Brötzmann Octet. This is free jazz, loud and aggressive. It avoids any hint of a regular meter. We thought that the general population would not want to dance to this music and would not feel much pleasure listening either. In the table you find 2 stimuli for any combination of extreme responses. 56 people participated in the first experiment. They listened to each stimulus for 30 seconds. And they responded by giving a rating how much they agreed with 22 statements. 20 of these statements were the items from phase 1. 2 items had been additionally proposed by the groove experts. Exploratory factor analysis showed how these items loaded on 2 correlated factors. In the upper block, you see the pattern matrix of items that were associated with the urge to move factor. The items are ordered by decreasing pattern matrix coefficients. So the items at the top of each block are those that are best aligned with the underlying factors. The lower block does the same for the pleasure factor. Next, we selected the items for the scales. We decided to go with 3 items per scale. We used 3 selection criteria. To be chosen, items needed to have high content validity ratings by the groove researchers. They also needed to have a high pattern matrix coefficient for the respective factor in the factor analysis. And we wanted the items to address different facets of the underlying concept. For the urge to move scale, we selected items 1, 2 and 4. And for the pleasure scale, we chose 11, 13 and 15. We excluded item 12. I love listening to this music. Because we already had selected item 11. I like listening to this music, which addresses the same general sentiment. Instead, we chose items 13 and 15 since they take a different angle on the pleasure topic. We carried out a second listening experiment with the same 8 musical stimuli and 197 participants. They responded to the music using the 6 selected items. Confirmatory factor analysis showed that a target model with 2 correlated factors had a good fit with the data and was significantly better than models with only 1 factor or with 2 uncorrelated factors. It can be seen that the 6 items measure the 2 underlying factors with high reliability. Cronbach's alpha was at 0.92 for the urge to move factor and at 0.97 for pleasure. It can also be observed that the 2 factors were strongly and positively correlated with each other. Pearson's correlation coefficient was at 0.80. The strong positive correlation between the urge to move and pleasure scales can be seen here in this scatter plot. It shows the urge to move ratings on the vertical axis and listening pleasure on the horizontal axis. The big symbols in the foreground show the mean ratings for the 8 stimuli. The small symbols in the background are single ratings by one participant and of one stimulus. Superstition is number 1. The mean ratings place it in the upper right quadrant. So it had indeed received the high ratings on both the urge to move and pleasure scales that we predicted. Peter Brötzmann and his wild bunch landed bottom left. So listeners felt low urge to move and low pleasure, also as we predicted. Number 6 is a snippet from a slow symphonic movement by Gustav Mahler. We thought that listeners would not get much urge to move from this music, but they would experience pleasure, and this was confirmed. However, the 2 purple stimuli ended up in the center, not in the upper left quadrant as we expected. Number 3 is the notorious chicken dance. We thought, this music is meant for dancing, so it would end up in the upper urge to move range. We also thought that nobody really experiences much pleasure listening to the chicken dance, at least not without proper intoxication. We were quite wrong about that. Listeners enjoyed the chicken dance more than we expected. You may notice that the upper left corner of the plot is nearly empty of any ratings. We wondered why this would be the case. There are basically 2 interpretations. Either we just failed to find stimuli that truly inhabit the upper left quadrant of this plot, and the situation could be amended by finding better stimuli. Or the other interpretation is that these stimuli do not exist, because pleasure is a precondition for the urge to move. This is a hypothesis to be tested in the future. This paper presented the experience of Groove Questionnaire. We hope that it will be useful to the Groove research community and that it will facilitate the comparison of results across studies. The questionnaire can also be applied outside of Groove studies whenever researchers need to assess to what extent music stimulates body movement and pleasure in listeners. This might be in the context of movement therapy, for example in Parkinson's, or in the context of sports and exercise. The pleasure scale might also be useful to study the benefits of music for people with mental disorders, such as depression. The questionnaire is in English, so translations might be necessary to apply it in different cultural settings. A German version has been developed by our colleagues in Hanover and will soon be published. And we hope that further translations into other languages will follow.